Hey, everybody, it is Emily, and you are about to watch the latest episode of Strange Mosaic. For a variety of reasons, I have decided not to split this into a public and patron segment. So the patrons got the sneak peek advanced version, and I've decided to make the entire show available publicly. So thank you to the patrons for making that possible. I hope you enjoy the show. If you do, and you would like more of what you saw here, links on how you can join us at Patreon or Locals are down below. I want to thank my good friend Erik Peterson for sitting in and co-hosting this very interesting conversation with the one and only Andy Colvin. So enjoy the show. All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and this is Strange Mosaic, and I am really excited for today's show. Just letting everybody know before we get started that this show was really inspired by my good friend Erik Peterson. You guys know him. He's a glass bead player. He's been on the show several times before, so he will be co-hosting with me. Erik, welcome. Nice to have you back.
Thanks, Emily. It's good to be here.
Cool.
All right. As well.
Me too. So, all right, I'm going to, if I did a full bio of our guest, I'd be reading for hours. So I'm just going to give a short and select version. Today's guest is an eclectic artist, photographer, filmmaker, publisher, musician, and best-selling author. And most importantly, he's been called one of America's great pain-in-the-butt original thinkers. He was either a founder or key player in the development of many trends and movements, including Xerox street art, spoken word, the Church of Subgenius, and he was the first to publicly preach the gospel of Slack in Austin, the 1111 Awakening Code, and synchro conspiracy, which we now tend to refer to as synchromysticism or conspirituality. Andy Colvin, welcome to Strange Mosaic. Nice to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Erik brought you back into my attention about 3 or 4 months ago. And when I went and looked back, I was like, well, I know that name. But I was like, I think he was a guest with Randy before I was the co-host with Randy many years before. And so I was like, I think he's the Mothman guy, right? Like, so I remembered that. And then I figured out, you used to do a bunch of stuff with Visigoth, and I used to listen to all of that. But I hadn't really heard from you or heard much of you in recent years. And when I went and just started looking at your biography on Amazon, I couldn't believe some of the other things having nothing to do with Mothman or what I sort of knew you to speak about that sort of hit hot button topics for me. And so Erik and I were like, yeah, we have to talk to this guy. Like, we've been doing something for the last couple of years that we refer to as playing the glass bead game, somewhat inspired by Hermann Hesse, but mostly just sort of synthesizing like reality, synchronicity, paranormal weird stuff into some sort of like meaningful narrative to us, and whether it is true or not true being less important than it keeping life interesting. And when we saw sort of what you've done, we're like, this guy's probably a badass glass bead game player. We'd love to talk to him. So we went looking for you and couldn't find you. And then last week, you made a comment on my Facebook page, and I didn't even know that we were friends on Facebook or that you had a Facebook page. So it all ended up the way it was supposed to be, and we're happy to have you here. And I think Erik had some other things he would like to say about you, so we'll completely embarrass you before we even get started. Go ahead, Erik.
Well, I have been very profoundly affected by your work, your research, and the things that you were willing to share with the public back, between the years of 2006 and 2008. I don't know exactly when it was that you were on the Visigoth radio show, but I mean, I'd never heard anybody quite like you, and the way you presented and connected seemingly unrelated information in these, like a tapestry, almost telling a story. And it stayed with me all of those years. I had kind of forgotten about Visigoth, and, I'd moved on, and he had stopped doing the radio show. And, as things go, it just was in the back of my mind. And something brought you to the forefront of my mind several months ago. And I looked for you on YouTube, and I found some of those old, it was recordings from the Visigoth show. And I re-listened to them again. And there was like critical information in there that opened up doorways for me in my research on the things that I was looking at. It was like I already knew where the missing piece was. And in my memory, you just happened to be that missing piece. But then as I, looked more into you and realized that I had this strange connection to you throughout my whole life, because when I was growing up, one of my favorite bands, even though as I'm, thinking about it, you weren't still in the band, but Ed Hall was the band that you started. And I had no clue about that. So that was blowing my mind. And maybe we can get into some of that as well, because I know, I've watched, I think, a documentary that you did about the band and that time in Austin. So anyway, I just want to say thank you for the things that you've done and the work that you've shared with people.
Thanks. That's really what makes it all worthwhile, is when you hear people say that really meant something to me. So I'm happy to hear that.
Awesome. So, what he said about the way you've woven a tapestry together of seemingly unrelated and totally disparate things into something where there's some cohesiveness that makes sense, at least to people who are able to think, like outside the box or read between the lines, is desperately in need right now, because there's an ever increasing number of threads being tossed into the sewing kit here, the sewing basket for weaving said things. But, unfortunately, when we're trying to understand these times, we keep being directed to people who have like a single profitable narrative to attached to whatever we're trying to understand, and who are very, very certain that they know what's happening. Right. And to me, in my experience, like the more I learn, the weirder it gets, but the less convinced I am that I actually know what's going on. And so when you see people becoming more and more certain and they're sort of, when I say stealing or dominating the conversation, I just mean in the sense that like they're stealing rationality from reality. You know what I mean? Like they're taking anything that could be sensible or meaningful or understandable out of the conversation and directing it into the stupidest possible corner. When it seems to me that conversations with someone like you would be much more informative. So we're happy to get to have one today. And, I guess, there's so many things we could talk to you about. Erik and I got together the other day and we're like, oh shit, we don't even know what to talk about because there's so much. But we both find you really interesting and sort of the path that you have traced. And we've been in some of the same places and considered some of the same things, but there's not very many like you sort of that have done all of this stuff and managed to keep your mind and produced as much work as you have. I mean, you've had your hand in either writing or editing or making contributions to tons and tons and tons of projects. So maybe we just start with sort of like, how do you think it's going, man? Right? Like you've been doing this a few weeks longer than Erik or I have in terms of trying to make sense of an unmake sensible reality. And, we're at a really weird spot. So maybe let's just start there and let the conversation where it goes. But where are you at in your understanding of reality?
Well, before I do shows, I usually sit down and I do one page at least, where I just try to summarize. Like I figure they're going to ask me that question. So what would I summarize everything as? And over the years, it's gotten a little more, I don't know. It's gotten more incredible, actually.
Yeah.
So, this isn't, my life thing is sort of different than, it is different than the Mothman thing. So, but I feel like I got as close to solving the Mothman thing as you could get. There was a guy at Forbes that said that once, and I feel that way. Of course, there's parts that you can never figure out, but for the basic question of why did Mothman appear then, I kind of have an answer. I don't know if it's the right answer, but it's an alternative to the one that's always on the media.
All
The
right.
media, as you said, they're always distracting people. And now that the social media and the CIA running that whole thing, it's gotten further and further off course. But the thing about the Silver Bridge is really a big distraction. Because why would Mothman appear 13 months before an event? That's way too far ahead. And they try to make it seem plausible because it's the number 13. Still, it's way too far. It must be something else. And that was kind of where I started with. Well, I don't know if I started there. That's where I've ended up. But as I was looking at where the creature was seen, that was all you really had to go on, other than maybe what some of the contactees said about it and what kind of prophecies may have been shown. That's the Mothman Prophecies is the title of the book that everyone knows about. And that's the last thing they actually talk about in all of the documentaries, really. They almost never go into any of that, other than he predicted the Silver Bridge, which is, isn't the right thing. Well, to me and my friend, he predicted 911. So I knew something that was in my subconscious because I had seen a brief vision of it. And so when 911 happened, I knew that whole thing was real. So now we've got the Mothman appearing in the 60s. We've got 911 being one of his prophecies. What were his other prophecies? Well, the Martin Luther King assassination. There was some strangeness around the Robert Kennedy assassination with Valiant Thor, which I think is related to the Mothman in a strange way. And then back in the 40s, there were sightings, and apparently in 47, there were sightings in West Virginia of the Mothman. So you look at those dates and you look at where he was seen, and it starts to seem like it was related to Union Carbide or the Navy, because Carbide had their plant on the Navy reservation. Point Pleasant, Carbide took all the stuff out of the TNT area and moved it to Area 51, supposedly. Clendenin, where they had the first Mothman sighting, was a Carbide, the very first Carbide plant in the late 1800s, I think, or early 1900s. So why was this? And there were also the prophecies of the chemical plant blowing up. Well, there's no chemical plants in Point Pleasant. And in the movie, they show the camera going south toward Apple Grove, where there's a plastics manufacturer, but they're not really like a chemical company. They make plastic things. Mm-hmm. But if the camera had turned to the left and gone up that river, the Kanawha River, you would find Carbide up there if you went far enough. And there were rumors of this going around that there might be an explosion. And there was apparently a Mothman witness having dreams about it. So that's where I took it. And then the Carbide links kind of went out to other places. James Earl Ray used a Carbide name when he was on the run after shooting MLK. Carbide was working with the Nazis during World War II. The Rockefellers were the owners of it. Really. The Rockefellers run the TNT area, essentially. They don't own it. Well, they do actually own it because Olin Manufacturing owns it. It's probably public now or something. I don't know how Olin's set up, OLIN. But the Rockefellers are running that show. The Lind Company, LINDE, which helped Carbide develop the Manhattan Project. They're a German company with links to IG Farben. And so Farben, Carbide, Bayer, DuPont, they were all shipping things down the river to Point Pleasant to be put together into nuclear warheads. And there was the very first nuclear reactor in Charleston, which was kept secret the whole time. So,
Andy, can I ask you a question real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Was this facility, was it in close proximity to any known Indian mounds?
Oh yeah, it was built on top of them, right? They just mowed them down and put the plant right on top.
Because my wife is from Ohio, and in south of Dayton in Miamisburg, there is a well-known Indian mound, probably over 60 feet, right? Very prominent. It's in a park and you can go to the top of it. And but right across the street from that is a museum dedicated to the nuclear facility that used to sit on that site. And they actually have a guy in the museum who used to be a nuclear chemist that worked for this place. And he was telling us that their job was to enrich tritium and not uranium, but some other nuclear element for the use in nuclear weapons. And, you know, he was actually involved in the cleanup or the helping the government to get rid of the tritium water from 3 Mile Island. So I just found that connection interesting, the fact that the Indian mounds are often near these nuclear facilities.
Well, you're talking about Mound's lab, and which was started by the CIA director who took over after Allen Dulles, McCone. He set that up, and they were basically running the show in Point Pleasant. Anything at that time, anything nuclear was their purview. They had security agents who would go out and make sure that they had a police force, the DISC police force, Defense Industrial Security Command, the largest police force in the country, really. And so the things in Point Pleasant connected to Mound's lab, and which also one of the guy who shot Martin Luther King's mother was connected to that lab. A little known fact. So that's one of the links that sort of starts swirling back to the Mothman Prophecies, because there was the Martin Luther King prophecy. And where do we go from there?
So go ahead, Erik.
I was just going to say, do you know of, did the Mothman prophesy, you know, things that we're going through right now?
Well, I guess let me finish my little timeline.
Yeah.
So you keep going forward to hit 911. And then there was a significant sighting in 2010 that I think has some meaning. It's Columbus witnesses in Point Pleasant seeing Mothman right where the Silver Bridge used to be. So I think the thing that links them all is, well, I was a deep diver in the JFK thing a long time ago, so I know a lot about JFK. And I kind of believe Mae Brussels' take on it, that it was the Nazis or the ex-Nazis. Mm-hmm. General Willoughby, high up in the Navy, all the guys involved in JFK assassination were all Navy. And so you got Navy, you got Nazis, and they're involved in the assassinations. What was after the assassinations? The Manson family stuff. And right. Manson grew up on my street and was at that place where we all saw Mothman. We know he was there because he burned down the school there. And it's basically sounds like the international fascist movement, mm-hmm. which after the war, Mothman seen in 1947 in Charleston, where they were helping the Nazis, taking in all these Nazis into government positions. They're still building this right wing. They're starting to build this right wing movement. In the 1960s, they sort of aligned with Jerry Falwell, or the 1980s, whatever it was. With Jerry Falwell comes in the 1970s, I think. So it's just this progressively insidious fascist thing that could threaten the world in general. I think that's why Mothman appeared, to warn us about this trend, or these very powerful people who are polluting the earth, forcing you to help them pollute the earth, killing people for political reasons, keeping the progressive movement down. If you look at Manson, for instance, what was his thing? He killed the peace movement. He personally killed the peace movement almost by himself, by murdering these starlets and people in Hollywood, which struck fear into the hearts of Hollywood. And so Hollywood changed its arc, and the public became much less tolerant of peaceniks, hippies, anything like that. Although it did carry on until the mid-70s. The closer you get to 1980, suddenly Reagan's back in, and we've completely thrown away all the possible good possibilities that could have come out of that. Today, it's more like we've got the pandemic, and to me, it seems like it's our best chance to have a universal healthcare. And I think that's the reason why we're having so much dissension about the CDC, for instance. If you can undermine the CDC and the government's role in health, you can keep things private as they are now, which is just a huge money generator. My next door neighbor over here is a medical financial analyst, and he's like, the insurance companies are all about holding money. They get the money from the providers or the patients, and they sit on it, and then they just make money off of it during the float. And they don't really care what's going on with the quality of care at all. It's up to somebody else, like the government, to regulate this stuff and get us on a track where we can actually take care of people. That's a huge thing. I think universal healthcare would go a long way to fixing a lot of our problems.
Okay, so quickly, I want to mention, Erik, now I'm kind of understanding just from that opening segment you sort of did there, Andy, why you thought the conversation between he and I might be interesting. So I grew up in Chatsworth, California. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it actually is where the Manson Tunnel is. And I had a number of very strange events, interactions, experiences as a child, which led, through the whole life and continue to this day. But a lot of them occurred around that area of Chatsworth, where the Manson Tunnel is, where Rocketdyne and Boeing is, where Spawn Ranch is, and where there was a very, very similar kind of nuclear thing going on to what you're describing there in West Virginia. And then obviously the presence of Charles Manson, and then Indian grounds, basically, right? Like, and cave paintings and all of this kind of stuff that seem to point to the area being something far different, really, than what we're being told that it is. And then the very first place that I moved when I left home as a kid was to West Virginia. And, at the time, I thought,
culture shock.
Right. At the time, I thought I understood why I was moving to West Virginia, although it didn't seem to make that much sense to my peers or anything else like that. And in hindsight, it's very clear to me now, actually, why I was going there. And part of it is the connection between these two places, Chatsworth and West Virginia, the hold that Boeing has on both the area that I grew up in and in Morgantown, West Virginia, where I was going to school. I was on the gymnastics team at West Virginia University, in that they created that PRT, which is like the very, like they won sort of some World's Fairy kind of award, expo-y kind of thing for that creation. And I only really realized that recently, that there was that connection. And I started digging further and further into things. When I lived in West Virginia, I just thought it was a boring place, and I had some weird experiences there, but I didn't understand how connected it was to the things that I'd be researching as an adult. But as I look back, the things that were going on, both for me personally and around me, were very, very bizarre. And when you don't know anything about the topics that we're talking about, you're just like, well, this is weird, that is weird, and whatnot. And suddenly, many, many, many years later, the whole thing made more sense to me than it did then. West Virginia is a super duper bizarre place. And so is Chatsworth. And Morgantown's a little different than where you're talking about in Point Pleasant and in Charleston and some of the areas you talk about more clearly. But that connection between the area you just described and where I grew up and the Manson connection, I did not know actually that Manson was connected to West Virginia. I was not clear on that.
Well, they make sure to obscure that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because it would point to Sarah Jane Moore, and suddenly you have two key figures knowing each other, and it would obviously draw media attention, and it did in the 80s, and they shut it down, and they forced the guy who had gone on TV saying they were friends, they forced him to recant his story. Like, we are not going to reveal that Sarah Jane was his handler, if that's what it was, which I think it probably was. She was involved in the SLA and Queen Tribal Thumb out of Cincinnati, another weird cult, and Jonestown. She's a slick spook, or was, and however she took, she was the patsy and had to spend time in prison.
So let me ask you something. Like, it's kind of a multiple part, and however you want to address this. What do you why do you think these nuclear, chemical, like military industrial weapons companies are always so interested in sacred Indian land, right? And then when you kind of a little later in what you said got into that the people controlling things are obsessed with polluting the earth, right? Like, do they just pollute it because they're careless and they don't care? Or does that pollution do something that most people don't think of aside from just making air unbreathable and things dirty and gross or whatever it is, right? So I guess I'm connecting those two things. What do you think is at the basis of this obsession that these companies always have with these lands? Like, why don't they just build their stuff only in like the obvious manufacturing part of town? Why do they always pick these natural locations to do it?
I think early on there was an obsession with crushing the Indians, just period. Just like get rid of their mounds. And I don't even think the Indians built the mounds, right? They don't claim that they built the mounds. Some do, some don't. But we don't know. But they're associated with the Indians, so therefore they were usually were in government-owned. They were set aside as parks or something, and then they're right on the river, which the company wants, and so the company's able to buy off some government officials and get the land. I think that's simple. It's just easier to get and cheaper, probably. But I think some of the people in the chemical industry early on were into alchemy and probably saw this as a chance to trample on the Indians even more. Such as I remember doing some stuff in my books about the symbols of America and how a lot of them do show the trampling of the Indians in the symbolism. It was a thing. Usually the wreaths that you see are the Indians, and usually there's like a big eagle stomping on it or grabbing it.
Yep. Which
is a twist on the Garuda legend, because the Garuda always does that too. But what it has in its claws is the Nagas, I believe. It's like a demonic or something.
It's like a serpent or a parasite, like a demonic kind of
and this gets to the crux of the matter, is that Mothman, if he's a Garuda, is a first responder to demonic activity.
Okay.
And I do believe that this place I grew up, right where we lived, where Manson burned down the school, I believe it is a place where demonic things can come in and out. And one of them got into Charles Manson and carried on through and caused him to put, maybe he passed it to Tex Watson, who then, it's like Bob in Twin Peaks.
I was just going to ask you. I was going to ask you about Twin Peaks next. Okay, right. Okay, yeah.
So it's almost like this demon, whatever's coming out of this vortex, changed our history in a very negative way through Manson. Okay. And the Mothman is there trying to keep a handle on all this stuff. I just don't think Mothman is the demon, because that's just not the Garuda doesn't do that kind of thing. It is clearly stated that it is an Heruka being, and it's the king of the Heruka beings, in charge of things that happen in the ray spectrum. So, i.e., the supernatural or the ether or anything that would come in and out of a portal would be. Now, why is the Garuda screwing up and letting things happen? Right? It's like, why does Jesus let the devil, or God let the devil do so much bad stuff? I don't know.
I've always been struck by the fact that, the connection between the fact that, whatever they're doing there, whether it's actually making chemicals, but there's also certainly alchemy going on. And, whatever they're doing there, or whatever's under the ground, that clearly some civilization that predates the Native Americans that we're referring to, because yes, most of those tribes claim that there was these other races of people that came before them that built all of this stuff. The Hopi Indians have their prophecies, but a lot of the other, Eastern, like the Iroquois and the Algonquins, they all say, we didn't build these mounds, but their shamans understood that the mounds were where they were situated were lined up with certain constellations and stars. And so they would make pilgrimages to these mounds because there was some type of an energy vortex there. And, if that is the case, you've got natural energy lines running underneath, like, ley lines and meridian lines. And so there's certain places where these things converge. So the fact that, yes, it is just, you want to be by the water and the government owns the land, that is certainly one way to explain it. But I also feel like, like what you're saying, Andy, is that maybe they're opening portals at these locations, and possibly the Garuda is coming through this portal and doing what the Garuda does, trying to counteract whatever the demonic activity is. But it's interesting that, Emily and I, we both talk a lot about portals and, particle accelerators and things like this. And so I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibilities.
So
it's also possible the mounds are natural somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff that just is kind of coming up. So like if the Garuda is something like that comes through when something around one of these areas is starting to activate, or something is being done that is going to open the gate for all these other things, and he sort of comes through as a warning. And then you've got someone like Charles Manson, who is a perfect vessel for these things to come into and then run amok. And like you said, Bob, in Twin Peaks, what I was going to ask you was, because you talked about the nuclear aspect over there, and in the third season of Twin Peaks, they're showing you how these weird creatures basically came in through the explosion in the desert in 1947, and that they were very, very attracted to electricity and essentially used the electric lines to basically time travel or kind of move about, and sort of as food and energy and whatnot. Right. And then, so different kinds of entities, different kinds of beings being able to come through and then use different kinds of frequencies as the way that they sort of move around resonates for me, both in terms of that, but also like what I think is going on in Chatsworth and why he may have been there. Right. Have you, when you're researching some of these things related to mounds, and you've looked into West Virginia, have particle accelerators come up as part of this for you at all, just out of curiosity?
Only in the Waxahachie in Texas. I had a friend who lived in Waxahachie, and he was always talking about the accelerator they were building there. I don't know. I guess that fell apart supposedly, but I noticed that the cryptozoologists had I guess a headquarters there, right at where the entrance to the accelerator was. So it made me wonder if this, just who in the cryptozoology movement is a spook?
So we
were talking earlier about people thinking I'm a spook. Well, I'm not the one making out on this deal. I'm not on TV.
So I don't know.
My action figure and my hat. Right?
So
where's my action figure?
So yes, no one has said to me that they think you're a spook, but when you look at someone with a biography like yours, right? Sometimes the first thing you think of first is, why haven't I heard of this guy? Or why doesn't he get more attention than he does? Or a person who's done all of this stuff, how could they be in so many places, so in such successive fashion, they must be a spook. So nobody's actually told me that they think you're a spook, but I would imagine that you probably get that question from people. The reason I asked about the particle accelerators is just that it's come up, like, I've done certain lines of research, and I'm not decided about everything, about anything, but particle accelerators seem to be something that are more prevalent than we would be led to believe, and may have like a different origin, and that a lot of these people that are going around claiming that they're constructing them are actually rediscovering or discovering something that have been there for a very long time, and trying to understand the way that they work, or activate them, or build sort of prototype copies and do the same thing, because of the amount of energy that they generate, and the ability to sort of rip holes in the fabric of space and time and whatnot. But I have found, including in Chatsworth, in the area that we're talking about, cave painting drawings that look exactly like particle accelerators, right? And if the Indians were drawing particle accelerators on their cave paintings, then it's impossible that Boeing or Rocketdyne built them in the 70s or the 80s or whenever they're saying that they did, right? And so we've started to look at that as like a data point with some of these anomalous locations. And I was just curious if that had ever come up anything in West Virginia with you, but it sounds like it didn't. So
I think they're building a one there now. I think they're going to build one in West Virginia. I think.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'll have to look into that. All right. I'll have to look into that and see what the sort of language and project around that is. But I'm becoming sneakingly suspicious that whenever they say they're building one, they've just found one and now they're going to study it.
Well, there's supposedly a tunnel that runs from Point Pleasant to where I lived in Charleston, in North Charleston. Some of it was natural, but I guess it was added onto. This is the story. I've heard this ever since I was a kid. And the midway point of that tunnel would be this town called Midway, which has a guy came out about 20 years ago or more, William Dean Ross, who lived there, and he claimed that there was a vortex there, and that the government was studying it at West Virginia, through West Virginia State College, and some famous scientists like C.B. What's that guy's name? C.B. Jones, Scott Jones, C.B. Scott Jones, CIA guy, Oleg, some Russian scientist. He named names. He said he was the videographer of the project. He said he had all the tapes of everything. You know, he sounds like a legit guy, and he's talking about this serious ass vortex. Now, interestingly, that's, there's some research done by, I think, Albert Budden, maybe, where you see that there's usually around a vortex, there's a 26-mile radius.
Mm-hmm.
So 26, so that means about the same distance between Point Pleasant and Charleston. And you'll see UFOs around that ring, not in the middle. It's like the eye of a hurricane or something. So it is, but it's probably spinning energy. So that could explain why maybe on that outer rim you can have subnodes.
Yep.
One in the middle, and we were on one of those.
Yeah. No, I mean, that sounds, what you just described matches a lot of what I've looked into about the phenomenon surrounding areas where there are known particle accelerators as well. So that's exactly it. So, okay, very interesting. I'm going to have to go looking into this spot in West Virginia. I just pulled it up. Erik, did you have a question or a comment about?
No, I mean, it just made me think about, there's all types of tunnels that have been discovered or rumored to exist. I mean, I grew up in Kansas City, and we have a cave, caves all over the place. And many people don't even know that. But in Kansas, there's one of like the largest underground, I want to call it a lake, not really an aquifer, but it's an aquifer. And it's this massive body of water that's underground, probably inside of a cave. So it just always made me wonder, is Elon Musk, with his boring company, is he really just going through and completing or annexing existing tunnels? And
yes.
Not really, just digging or boring. I'm sure, here where I live, I know that DC has got tunnels underneath of it. People have talked about it. Some people claim to have gone down there. Who knows how vast the network of tunnels is? I know that there are things that were built that existed here prior to the colonists coming here. You can see the remains of these things. So I'd be curious. They were talking about Elon was going to bore his way to Baltimore from DC, but I'm wondering if they're not just talking about projects on expanding tunnel networks.
I'm not really up on what the Musk tunnel thing.
So Elon Musk has a company called Boring, literally spelled Boring, which I like, it's fun to play with all of the stuff around that. But, he started this in Los Angeles, which is where I'm from. And, most of what he did there was not actually bore open tunnels. There's been, a network of underground tunnel systems in Los Angeles that have been talked about as, in a variety of ways, including underground civilizations having existed in them, there was an article about it in that day's LA Times back in the 40s, right? And that he really just sort of built out and modernized these as opposed to actually bored them. And then now he's here in Austin, right? He lives just across the lake here from me, and Boring is here, and they're going to start doing tunnel stuff here. And I know from my own experiences when I used to live here and things now that there's also a vast system of underground sort of caverns, tunnels, holes, all kinds, and an aquifer in this same area of Austin that he's now supposedly, there's even graffiti artists referring to the time tunnel people, right? Literally underneath, like in graffiti that is just sort of underneath the building where Elon Musk now lives, right? So it's kind of, he tends to do this. He goes to this place where there's like a lot of lore and sort of pretends that he's doing this when it's just kind of like what I was saying. Maybe these companies are just discovering ancient particle accelerators instead of building them, right? And then, making some modern use of them that, closes down stories about what might be really going on there from a more metaphysical point of view, right?
And he never actually builds them. I mean, they talk about it, here where I live, they were talking about it for a couple years. And then all of a sudden it's like, we're just not going to do that anymore. But he was here. There was an expectation that something was going on underground, but then they say, well, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So that's kind of what he does. I don't know if he actually did create any sort of usable tunnels in Los Angeles, but from my recollection, he hasn't actually bored any tunnels or done anything. And yet this company goes around to different cities and contracts with them to develop tunnel systems, and then only to have the city, back out or something goes amiss. And yet this company is still afloat and they haven't bored one tunnel yet.
Some sort of tax shelter or something, write-offs, I don't know.
Well, that, but also I think it creates an explanation, like with the increasing amount of awareness based on the internet and all of this kind of stuff, that these other sort of layers and levels of realities exist, they want an explanation that is a very easily offered one to people about why they're there. Oh, Elon Musk did his project and then he abandoned it, instead of, what's really been going on there for a very long time. I think they use Elon Musk to distract in the algorithms. Like when people go and look up Tesla now, the first thing they get is a car company. Right. And so like young people think Teslas are cars. They don't think he was a human being who believed in a different way of doing things and could show you how. So I think that's what with all of these projects he does, they distract from the nature of what the thing really is and buries it in the algorithm to like a page. I don't know if you're familiar, Andy, with the dead internet theory, but if you go and look on Google, there's a lot less shit there now than it used to be. It's kind of like village, and all of the important stuff on the real things would be on the other side of the Potemkin front, right? So I think that's what his main, he's the lone scum, right? There you go, if you play with his name. So I want to hit on because you made an interesting connection from what you were talking about there and the connections to Martin Luther King and Kennedy. And I'm glad you brought up Mae Brussell because of those sort of more famous 70s and 80s kind of researchers. She's always been my favorite as opposed to some of the other ones we're often referred to. She made the most sense to me and I liked her style. I like that she mailed tapes to people and, I kind of like all that stuff. But you talked about that and then you kind of talked about what's going on now with the pandemic and a really, really different take on it than almost anybody else who talks about it in the alternative media space, right? Like there's a very different narrative that's going on here. So my feeling is that those two things, you felt like there was a connection between them. And I'm going to ask you to flesh that out a little bit more because you went from talking about one to talking about the other. Please.
What were the two things, 911 and the pandemic?
Well, you talked about Mothman and its connection to like Martin Luther King and the Kennedy. Right. You talked about the Nazis and Mae Brussell and all this kind of stuff. And you said something about 911, but then you also went to the pandemic and how you see the pandemic as largely being a way to suppress the movement towards universal health care, which is a very, very different connection than we get from almost anybody else in sort of the alternative information space. And so you said a few things about it, but that isn't generally where like conspiracy research or alternative avenues lead you. I wanted you to flesh that out a little bit for us because those things seem connected the way you described them.
Well, the same players, I think Mothman was alerting us to a group of players and they've been doing all these things. Some terrorism, assassinations, manipulation of stock market, manipulation of the drug industry. You got guys like Rumsfeld, starting running vaccine companies and stuff. So it's all the same kind of Prescott Bushy, wealthy Wall Street guys, very conservative, almost Nazis. Some are Nazis. Just continuing on to try to bring the Fourth Reich back, really.
So are you saying that like these biochemical companies now that are dealing with this sort of penetration into the space of the body are just the modern day iteration of the chemicals polluting the earth and penetration sort of into that body before, and it's like game looks a little different, but it's the same players, same game.
Yeah, and it kind of depends on what you mean by pandemic. I was talking about the response to the pandemic.
Correct. Yeah. Yes.
Who knows if it was man-made or not? But you got a pandemic, you got a response, and you got like this weird dissonance where nobody can get on the same page, and pulling in a lot of what used to be lefties who were in the anti-vax movement, back in the 90s. 80s were kind of like a weird whatever, but in the 90s things started kind of, I guess, going back to normal again, whatever normal is. And so there's been a switching of sides in a way. And I know in the 90s, there was a shitload of stuff out there about conspiracy, and it was sort of like we had gone from pre-digital, suddenly we're digital, and all the old folks who had all the papers, who had the spiral bound conspiracy things, they put all that stuff on the internet, on Yahoo groups and stuff, and so you could get all kind. It was like a really golden time, I think, of exposing conspiracies that were true, largely true. The people were serious about it. There wasn't any money in it, right? They're doing it because they love the subject and they want to get to the bottom of these conspiracies. And that's what's been taken away. And I think that was purposeful on the part of the CIA when they said in the 2000s that they were going to go into social media. And that's what they did. And they just used social media to bury the real stuff and then bring in a bunch of fake stuff to keep people distracted. And they actually said it was going to be distraction material.
So, yeah, I agree with you that there's a difference between, quote, a pandemic and a pandemic response and whatnot, right? But it is interesting what I think I heard you say, that there was a Mothman occurrence in 2010, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And if you look, whatever people think of this, it's interesting just to, that is that sort of the heart of synchromysticism or conspirituality, is connecting disparate dots. If you start to look at when a lot of these studies, a lot of these projects being funded, a lot of weird things around what we now know is whatever you think this pandemic is, a lot of that activity happened around that time, right? In that 2009 to 2011, 12, 13, 14 period of time, so that there would be a Mothman sighting or occurrence or something like that to sort of warn of the next round that was to come, is an interesting, is an interesting idea. I wanted to ask you about this because I think one of the things that maybe, you and I have in common, I don't know about so much Erik, is that, before I found my way into all of this stuff, I came from the left, right? I was, I don't meet too many people in sort of conspiracy circles that come from the left, right? A lot of them come from the right, or if they did come from the left, they are now part of the right, kind of thing. I come from a family that's always been left. I never voted for a Republican in my life when I used to vote. I'm voluntarist or sort of anarchist or whatever. Now I don't participate to the extent that I cannot participate. But I've always been curious as to, and maybe it's a little different for me because I'm a little bit younger than you, why there aren't more leftists in that conspiracy space, and why there is so much alignment between the conspiracy space and the right. And it's something that both fascinates me and also troubles me for some of the reasons that you just kind of laid out when you said that about the switch. And to the point now where leftists seem to despise any talk of anything related to conspiracy, though they're very dismissive of it. How is that? Am I right in my assessment of you? And please go on for a while about this, because it's one of the things that disturbs me most about this whole space, right?
Yeah, that was the brilliant Roger Stone operation to infiltrate JFK groups, conspiracy groups, paranormal groups like mine, Mothy Talk, was to do this, and he succeeded. He got everybody to turn to the right. And by smearing, the tactic of smearing something is an old tactic. And so basically they smeared conspiracies. Again, they're always, every few years they have to do it again and again because people catch on. The majority of people believe that JFK was assassinated, and a lot of people used to believe in the insider theory for the Twin Towers. And periodically they have to come on and make you feel guilty for feeling that way. Because the corporations are always right and they're good and they're and on and on and on, and or the government is not up to anything, of course. So they just it was beautiful. I mean, it was a well done, twisty turny smear operation on conspiracies by pulling in ridiculous things to go with the real stuff. And George Norrie's been doing this for years. He used to, in the old days, he'd have a pretty good news thing at the beginning, almost left wing. And then he brings on somebody that traveled to Mars and, was a super soldier and da 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 da. That's another one that that was another one that I have to apologize to the world for. I came up with a lot of these things just as speculating about my own childhood, and boom, within no time flat, super soldiers were everywhere.
Right.
They just watch what you're doing. If I don't know, my experience in all this has been very real. I don't lie about any of it. And so they just sit there and watch. And as soon as I say something that's verboten, they come up with a little spin on it and have somebody else put it out. And it just happens over and over and over again. They're watching all the time and manipulating. And that's how they've achieved their dominance over social media, because they've got the funding to do it. And we even located what we think is one of their headquarters for doing this stuff. If you'll recall, this is a very interesting kind of Mothman synchronicity thing. There was a sighting of Mothman. I'm trying to remember what year this was. 2008 maybe, in Akron, near Akron. Mothman seen at corner of streets. I go there and I find an address of 1111 Independence Avenue. And I look at it from above and the buildings look like 111L. Well, right around that time, or right before that or after that, the Frick brothers had been chased by men in black in a van with government plates 111L. And then I found that on an Egyptian diagram, a hieroglyphic 111L. And but when I was there, I noticed the apartment building right next to these buildings had all these antennae on top. We go over there and all the cars have Army 25th Airborne stickers on them. And like, why would a regular apartment building have all of those antennas? I mean, it was insane. Well, that's because they're all working for, this is the part of the Army that does social media. So Mothman actually led me to their lair. Yeah. That's how crazy it gets. Now, I don't want to prove it. I don't want to prove it, because if you start like revealing and proving that a certain spot is some secret op place, you're probably going to end up dead, right? So there's just some things you can just say what happened, what you might think is going on there. It's still dangerous if you're really doing real research now. It really is. But if you're a time traveler from Mars, or you channeled Valiant Thor or anything completely far out, and you look good and you have tattoos and the hat and the cleavage or whatever, you're on the internet and you do the tarot cards and readings and medium, it's just like, and especially you have to like be into Aleister Crowley. Supposedly, I mean, I don't know what is going on with people.
Right.
But Crowley's so important because that was just another British intelligence op, really.
Right. Okay.
I just wanted to say, you mentioned Valiant Thor twice now. Mm-hmm. Are you aware or familiar with the show American Horror Story?
It seems like I saw a couple of episodes.
So
was there a Valiant Thor episode?
The latest season of this show, it's split into two parts. So the first half of the season is unrelated to the second half of the season. So the second half is essentially about Valiant Thor being an alien or from another dimension, and he is essentially using the president Eisenhower as this puppet to carry out all of this secret research and then they carry it out, right? That could never stopped. And so current day, they're pumping out alien human hybrids from mothers that they've impregnated. And it's just very interesting though, that like they took a real, I wouldn't call it, it's documented at least what was actually happening. It's probably left up to people's imagination, but they did imagine something like that. And they put it into this highly watched, very popular television series on, I forget what station it's on, but so that's been put out there into the American consciousness as well.
Wow, I did not know that. Oh my God.
So you have no way of knowing this, but just that last little monologue you did hit on lots and lots of our buttons here. And so what you were just saying, okay, I'm trying to decide which order to go in here. All right. So your point about when you were a kid, right, you were just doing what you were doing and having these experiences. And then it seemed like anything you talked about or anywhere you went, then some fake version that wasn't you, but like made the story much more ridiculous or sexy, became famous and destroyed the actual real story.
Well, that all happened after I became an adult and I'm out there talking about stuff, the last 20 years.
Yes. But you were just having weird experiences when you were a kid and throughout your life, right? Okay. So where I grew up in Chatsworth, right, I had all these weird experiences, and some of them were pretty strange and otherworldly feeling. But what was interesting to me is there was a gentleman, and you sort of referenced him, named Andrew Bashago, who says that he had been to Mars and who says he's a time traveler and all this kind of stuff. He grew up in the exact same neighborhood of Chatsworth that I did, right? And we went to a lot of the same places and did a lot of the same things. But he is very, very convinced, and I spent hours talking to him, that he has been to Mars and that he, was part of a time travel program and all of this kind of stuff. And what's funny is there's a lot of markers and points in his story that, like, I'm like, okay, well, that sounds familiar to me. But like the way this assumption that I came to from my own experiences is that they were running projects and programs in Chatsworth, like Project Talent kinds of things, mind control kinds of things, and identifying kids who maybe had some like knack for picking up on trends or for being sensitive to funny energies. And so following things to that area. And, that I was probably in that. Right. But the same experiences that led me to believe that I had fallen into some kind of MK Ultra Project Talent kind of thing led him to believe that he'd been to Mars with Barack Obama. Right. And it was fascinating to me because there is something really going on there. And it does have to do with this area near Santa Susana Pass, where all of these kind of installations that we've just talked about and then all this kind of stuff, there's a lot of occult things going on there. There's a lot of mind control. I see no evidence that even though Rocketdyne or Boeing are there, that they've ever built a rocket that has gone to space there. And certainly not that they're sending children to space in elevators. Right. But when you combine some of the weird details of the things that go on there, right, and you have a certain personality that's predisposed to think that their perception about all that stuff it can't be wrong, right, then there you get this story, right, that then takes any attention away from this other stuff that actually really is going on there, that we could begin to understand how our world, both parapolitically and like actually naturally and metaphysically, really works. Instead, we're arguing over whether somebody went to Mars with Barack Obama, right? And that's way sexier, whether you believe him or not. It's more fun to talk about that than try to dig out the pictures of the cave paintings and why is there a particle accelerator on a 1,000-year-old cave painting, right? There's just something sexier, or what you're talking about, like the superhero with the hat and the whatever kind of thing, right? So that's interesting that you went there with that. And then you started talking about your 1111 independence in Ohio and discovering this apartment building that is really like the headquarters for all of the running these sort of social media kind of ops like that, right? All right. So I'm fascinated with certain areas of town here in Austin and with buildings. And I have all kinds of weird ideas that like buildings and city blocks are some sort of like almost like a QR code, kind of like you were saying. You looked up above and it was a 111L, right? I see patterns that are being used as symbolism or to extract information of a certain kind. But the building that I am by far the most obsessed with here in Austin is called the Independent. And it is a very strange building. In fact, I'm going to show it to you in just a second, right? With all kinds of the antennas and strange technology on the top of it that you're talking about. And Mark Zuckerberg just bought 33 floors of it. Right, let me show you this building. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
They're building a big, Google and Facebook are both building huge data centers here in Columbus, where I am now.
Yeah.
And across the street is going to be the new Intel chip manufacturing place. And I think, was it you that mentioned the optical, there's some sort of, were you mentioning the optical cable technology here in Columbus? Was that you?
Erik, did you say something about optical cable technology?
Oh, that was last night at our dinner party. I went to a dinner party near the secret base here in Columbus. We used to have a secret base. It's no longer there. They put a casino over it, the Hollywood Casino. And we know this couple that lives right next to it. And suddenly we're after dinner, we're sitting there, and the husband starts seeing an aura around me and my wife. And he's like freaking out. He's never seen auras like this. And he said mine was shaped like a big V. And I say, well, that's probably Mothman, watching over me. And
so that aura, that energy is the same thing that attracts you to all of this stuff, right? That's what they're looking at in projects and programs. They're not sending you to Mars to fight with fake dinosaurs.
Right.
Right. So let me show you. This is the Independent building that I'm telling you about. Look at this. Okay. So this is called the Independent. And if you look up top here, this is a cable array up top. And from above, there's a QR code on top of it. Right.
Oh boy.
And if you look at some of this, so I have all kinds of theories about this, and some of them are pets that are just fun to, kind of make up stories, and others are more real. But this is what I would refer to as interdimensional architecture, right? Like this.
They're building one of those in Seattle right now, except it also twists.
Yep.
And I think the architects are just smoking too much weed.
Well, I'm sure that's part of it. But I think this gets into what you were, the corporate explanation of things. I think this has something to do with corporate espionage and infiltration. And we know that they use psychics and remote viewers to try and do that stuff. And I have kind of a weird theory going that with some of these buildings, right, that part of how they're moving around and spying on each other is through dimensional movement. And if you have a building that has one, let's say in the other dimension, the building is totally straight, but in this one, it's off angle. If you hide your secrets in an area that isn't accessible through the building in another dimension, it's harder for the spying to occur. Just playing.
That's where Special Agent Dale Cooper got sucked out into the dimension and became Bob.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, but I just thought that was interesting that it's called the Independent, and it's basically, the updated modern Austin version of what you're talking about over there. And so your ability to collate these things, right? To me, and I was going to ask you this, did you have the feeling that you were part of some kind of program or project or intelligence something as a kid, and that you've basically been followed your whole life because they know you'll find the next interesting thing, and then they can sort of grab onto that, manipulate, distort, and you'll move on to the next thing, and they'll run that operation for a number of years until you come up with the next good thing?
Yep, absolutely. And but there's stuff behind the story that's real stuff. Like Harriet's dad worked at the Sugar Grove base in West Virginia, which was the one in the X-Files they're always showing.
Mm-hmm.
And Indrid Cold and those guys were coming around the neighborhood, hypnotizing us, watching us. Harriet had her aunt worked at China. Her aunt was the commander of China Lake.
Mm-hmm.
In California.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with China Lake.
serious intelligence family.
Yeah.
My dad was best friends with her dad. My dad was working on some secret project of some kind. We're all being watched. The military comes to our grade school, does assessments. They claim it's some study being done by Harvard or something. And Harriet claims they took her many times and did stuff with her. I don't have that memory at all. It's like they rejected me because I was an artistic kid. I was just drawing pictures all the time. I had a really good memory, but I wasn't like Harriet's, who was totally photographic. So that's where the super soldier stuff came from. I was talking about that, and when the spooks heard it, they're like, okay, well, let's create one that's even better. He goes to Mars and fights dinosaurs, and MK Talent was what we were calling it.
Yeah.
And it was right there. It's at the grade school where Charlie Manson and Sarah Jane Moore both went. That was my grade school. But anyway, remind me the last thing you asked, because I think I forgot something. What did you?
I think I asked about, that you were possibly part of a project, but that basically they figured out that you were an intelligent, artistic kid who had the ability to sort of sniff out what the next big thing coming was. So you would arrive there before anybody else, right? They would kind of watch what you do. And at the right moment, you have some freedom to move around and create something. And then at a certain moment, they come in and start manipulating it, knowing that you might leave pissed off because shit's going wonky, but you're just going to go on and discover the next thing, which they'll follow up with on you a few years later, like an endless array of discovery and infiltration. We are sold this bill of goods, and I'm not saying there's nothing to this, that mind control programs, MK Ultra kind of programs, are all about creating monarch sex slaves or super soldiers or whatever. And maybe there's some truth to that on some level. Maybe that was one of the original projects, but I have what we're talking about here, Project Talent or MK Talent. I think there's a program called MK Option, and that is they find interesting people and they watch what they do, and then they have the option to make use of the things that they learn from watching interesting people just live their lives. Right. And sometimes you bump up against that, and sometimes hassles are created for you, but never to the point where life becomes unbearable, because that would actually be like ruining their golden goose, when instead, if they leave you alone after a bit, you'll just move on to the next thing, and then they'll know what to do next.
That is a really good explanation of how I think I thought the whole time. I just wasn't, I couldn't say it that way, the way you just did, but that's it. And a good example is we also had a third kid, me, Harriet, and Tommy. Tommy's the one that saw the 911 thing first. And he later became a NASA engineer. And the whole thing was started by him wanting to be a warlock and having me do this little ritual, which led to Mothman letting me see the vision as well as him. And so it was a conjuration thing. And when I discovered the Mothman Prophecies book in the early 90s, then it really brought it together for me, because we didn't even call it Mothman, and we didn't know any of the stuff about Point Pleasant. We just knew what was happening in our town. So I get all this new information. I'm like, oh my God. And so I started writing about my weird childhood on the Octopus forum on Yahoo, and some other ones, like Dusty Rhodes had one. And anyway, this is where the X-Files guys found the story for the Scully arc from my story about Harriet and how she had the alien puncture wounds on her neck. And she had the missing baby, which she thought somehow they had taken my DNA and hers and mixed it together into a baby before she ever had sex, right? She claims to have had an immaculate conception, and that the baby was taken away after that. But with her heavy security or intelligence connections, and it's entirely possible that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. This is the part that's fascinating to me, is they seem to want to ignore what I think are like the weirdest, craziest, strangest things ever, and make this cartoon superhero thing, when the other is actually more interesting, and it's where the answers really lie. What you said about you didn't have all this photographic memory or talent, or the photographic memory that Harriet had, that you were the reject because you were just kind of a weird artistic kid. I see that stuff I very, very differently, right? I see that actually they want people to think that. They want people to think that they're looking, and sometimes they are. I have an unusually good memory, but there's some other weirder things about me. But I know people that are just like files, that they don't really have anything too interesting about them, but they're like files. They can remember everything. They're super smart. And maybe they're looking at that, but out of the corner of their eye, they're looking at the other kid, right? The kid who's into something a little bit weirder. And even when they're doing like, when they're, I asked my father one time when I'm, balls deep in all the weird stuff going on in my life. I'm like, did you ever like have any suspicion that you could have been in like some sort of intelligence program? My father has done a lot of work in Africa and South Africa, that you could have gotten sucked up by one of these things. And he says to me, that's impossible. No way. You want to know why? Why? I interviewed for the CIA and they rejected me. Right. But literally he's like, and then
rejection.
Right. Then a week later, this opportunity popped up with Project.
They all say that. They all say that.
All say that. Right. And so that's the whole, to me, like rejection by any of that stuff is actually more indication of person was so interesting that they had to create something special. They couldn't put you into one of their normal pathways, right? They're like, all right, we're just going to watch this one and see what he does. And later we'll know what to do.
I think my mom actually, I was very young at the time. I was probably in first and second grade. But I remember my mom dating this man who he had technology that hadn't been released yet. So he brought over like the latest Commodore, the Atari before it was available to the public. And then he also planted listening devices in our home, which my mom later found and then ended the relationship. But I just thought, I always wondered, why was he bugging the apartment, and where did he get all of this stuff before anybody else could buy it? So I don't know that he was a spook, but he certainly fit certain patterns. And I've noticed several times in my life where I have said something or come up with an idea, and then later seen that idea acted upon, or it could have been when I was in the Navy and I went over to the Middle East, and I was really taken by the way that they smoked hookah after they ate, and how it was this ritual, and sitting around and doing this together. So I had an idea. I wanted to come back and popularize this in the United States. And of course, being a young guy in the Navy, I have no money, nothing came of it. But then several years later, it became this huge thing that just blew up everywhere. And there's, I've had several other interesting or unexplainable things that I've thought about that I've never actually done, but they've later been picked up. So I always thought, these ideas are out there anyway, and we're just picking up on them. And some people are very tuned into them and are willing or able to act upon them. But, Andy, with your life, when you were down in Austin, and you got involved with the Church of the Subgenius, and then of course, Richard Linklater makes this movie Slackers. You were involved in some way in that, correct?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how did that all come about? Were they approaching you, or when you got into the Mothman stuff, didn't you seek out Keel, or did he find you?
Oh, I knew he was going to be there, so I made an effort to go and meet him. But it was really interesting the way he met everybody. We were kind of all sitting there waiting on him to show up and watching TV in the tavern or whatever. I think it was some part of the hotel that's not there anymore, or I think it's become a new store, Mothman type store. But they had a TV and everything, and then he just walks in behind us and sits down at the table behind us and just starts watching with us. And he didn't even say anything. And it was a documentary that had been made for the Mothman Prophecies movie, which is a good one. It's well done. And then slowly, I turned around and I asked him what he thought, and then he was totally approachable guy, very humble and wonderful sense of humor, but I think I have a style for some reason, I wrote this down earlier. I just write down random thoughts I'm having that morning, and it has to do with being in the game. So after my father died, he worked at Carbide on The Secret Thing, and I may have been murdered. I'm like 12 years old. The only way I could get through it, well, I had to start working too, but when I wasn't working, I would play basketball because I'd be out, I would be moving, and I wouldn't have to think about the troubles, you know. And so I just started playing basketball, and that was really what I focused on all through high school. And I developed theories based on how people play. Like I also have theories about how people drive. You can tell a lot about how people by how they drive. But in playing in team sports, you learn a lot about yourself and others. And I noticed that I had a particular desire to win, because that was the point of playing. And not to the point where you were going to hurt anyone or anything, but just within the rules of the game, how do you win? And I noticed that a lot of people, when it comes down to crunch time and the pressure's on, they get distracted by something. And I couldn't figure it out. What are they doing? Because it's, you know, you've done this a zillion times. Just put it in the basket. But no, they would crunch up and and freeze up and everything, all manner of. And I realized it was all mental. And so I developed a way in those points to continue to be in my body. Like, and this is a very subtle thing, but there's a difference between being right there, doing what you're doing without any external thoughts, and over here being there and thinking about you doing that. Because you've added an additional platform. Now you're here and you're looking at your performance. And that's when you're going to screw up every time, because you're going to get it verklempt. I can't perform. So you push that out, and you just got to be in the moment, however you can do that. And that's a really important thing in life, is to really be in there. And what people in Austin, for instance, never understood was that I had already developed that ability. But when I'm taking photos, I'm still being that first guy. Even though I'm taking photos, I've not removed myself. I'm looking through the lens the same way. And it caused a lot of problems back in those days because no one was doing selfies. And I was considered to be infringing on people's privacy. And I'm going around trying to film footage for Slacker, just showing people living their normal lives in our Ed Hall building, which is what Linklater used as his template. He found a little group of art students, well, a big group actually. It was the Art Students Association met there. And we would meet there and do crazy music experiments and stuff. And so he really came in and just sort of mined our group. And that was one of my early experiences with someone mining your group. And I'm out there, I actually came up with the introduction to Slacker, where you're driving in from out of town and you're coming into Austin, and it's all these weird people, you know. And for me, it felt like home, because I never really felt like West Virginia was home because I was so different, but I really felt like I fit in Austin. And so after all that work, there's trouble in the band, which is another show. But again, paranormal stuff was happening in that building, in the Ed Hall house.
Where was that?
46th and Red River.
Yep. Okay.
Waller Creek's behind it. Waller Creek has a demon in it. No one knew this at the time. It goes all the way down to the art building, which is where I did an art performance, and I had Daniel Johnston be part of it. And he couldn't do it because he said there's a demon here.
The art building on campus is what you're talking about.
Yeah, right outside. And the other guy that I was working with, who was a shaman, a Mexican shaman guy, he too said he saw it and he couldn't do the performance. Two people who didn't even talk to each other both told me there's a demon in this creek. Well, someone in the Ed Hall house murdered themselves and their whole family before we moved in. And there was this evil presence there, and it was messing with our ability. It was messing with my ability to be seen by them. They weren't seeing me, you know, like the way you've described who you think I am, or the work I do, or the ability to see things. that they really thought that was aberrant. And hey, we're just like good frat rock guys. Come on, we're not gonna do this creepy, weird stuff that you want to do. But I was really just expressing what I thought was there. It was a very dark presence. So yeah, and in the end, I'm written out of the slacker thing completely because of these strange interactions with the people in the band and this misunderstanding. Crazy.
That's why I got the impression that, as it pertains to you being a spook or not, I was like, this man has been involved in a lot of things, but the one thing that's concurrent through all of them is he has not sought fame or fortune or the spotlight for any of these things. In fact, I mean, I would say, if these guys were just frat rock guys, that you were really the impetus behind Ed Hall and what that music and that sound was trying to convey to people. Because yes, that, you got Nick Cave and some other people that picked up on that sound, and maybe in the same way that you had. But you were the driving force behind, like, when you think about Ed Hall as a band and the music, right? I don't think of frat rock guys.
Yeah, well, it was very frat-like. Let's put it that way. Because one of the guys who left really early on, and they basically changed the history. Ed Hall started when me and Gary started recording stuff together in the play area, I guess you call it. And we were both art students, and we were both very similar kind of wacky guys. And I like to record stuff, and I always have. And that was the first thing I started doing, was recording everything. And that's what happened, is because I was recording stuff, everybody was interested in what you're getting. And Gary starts, and I started playing little things together. And then Larry and Kevin, who were kind of on their own group, they were kind of like their own thing. But because Larry had been there a year and had played one show with a different guy, they've now rewritten that as the beginning of Ed Hall. But I never even heard of that. I mean, I just knew they had played an open mic at the university lounge or something. And then a year later, we move in, and Gary and I start doing our thing, and they joined in. And I always thought that was what it was. It was these four guys was the start of it. But then after the problems with the troubles, then I'm almost written out, and I would have been written out if I hadn't have done the Charlie Manson Street compilation. That otherwise, I don't think I would be mentioned at all. So that's what happens when people think there's something really valuable here, or something. I can't even. It's so convoluted. That whole story, it involves people's family of origin issues. Mm-hmm. Which has never been my strength, really.
No,
my family's weird, and it broke up early with my dad's death, and my mom was a narcissist, and I had to start working at age 12, and I had this rough road already long before I got to Austin. And these guys are just like in college, their parents are paying for the school and all their equipment, and I'm completely working 2 jobs and have to pay for everything. And they just couldn't relate. I don't think they could relate to they didn't respect where I'd come from, I think.
So you said a lot of really interesting things there. I want to go back first to what you said about being in your body, that you were able to have, whether it be winning the basketball game or even probably prior to that, like maybe that was when you really became aware of it. But prior to that, with some of your other strange experiences, part of the reason you're able to recount them clearly and accurately is because you are able to stay intact while they're happening, instead of separating out to deal with the trauma and then only having partial memory of a situation, which then allows other people to manipulate your story. So what you're talking about being super present, it's funny because Laura and I were having a conversation this morning about being completely in what you're doing and not thinking about anything else, nothing, soul focused in your body completely. So it's funny you bring that up, but that ability, my guess would be that is your superpower, right? That was why you are able to extract the most amount of information out of these experiences, which is why it's fascinating to watch you and then ultimately necessary to rid the operation of you at a certain point. Because when somebody has the kind of granular memory, I know you said she had a better photographic memory, your friend, but when you do what you said, you're extracting the pure essence from the experience as opposed to just like the most fantastical parts of it, right? And the essence of the experience is the part that is real. And that's much harder to manipulate, right? And so your ability makes you both like, we want to see we want to like see what this guy pulls from the strangest experiences, but we also can't really have him around when we're telling the story to everybody else because he's going to tell the part that we don't want people to know because we want to manipulate the situation. And so that technique that you're very aware of from the time you're a teenager, I think is really probably your most unique, and that you do it and that you're very, very aware of it is super interesting. Being in your body is really, really challenging for a lot of people, right? Like, I mean, and if you think about what we're talking about here with the parapolitical, so many of the myths rely on, I left my body. I was observing myself from outside of myself. Right. I don't remember this part, but suddenly I was here or there or whatever it is, right? You kind of are something different in that area than what we mostly hear about. And then to your point, but that some people would equate that with, oh, well, he's just not as spiritual or not as metaphysical. But you're actually sitting here saying that the demon of Waller Creek and that energy that was coming through was part of what you were bringing to the sort of artistic creation that people didn't really get. It actually makes you much more present to the reality of what these very strange things are, right? And one of the things that is amazing about Austin is first of all, I felt the same way when I moved here, right? I came from Los Angeles. I made more friends the first month I lived here than my entire life because I was weird. And there was something about that they found appealing. But at a certain point, a lot of the people sort of seemed to exhaust of that and just wanted to like go with the more simple way of doing things or whatever. But there is something here, and I don't know if it has to do with the river or the aquifer or the limestone, because it's weird around Waller Creek. It's also weird around Shoal Creek, right? There's so many areas around woven into the way that the nature sort of pulls up to the urban part of Austin. It's pretty metaphysical. And I have a lot of weird stuff. Like when I first moved here in 1999, I had a set of like, when you have something that you're not sure if it's like a dream or a memory or a vision, right? And you have a visual of something and you go looking for it, but you can't quite find it. But it was so, it was so clear in your mind. A lot of the things that I was seeing back then are here now, but they weren't actually here then, but I could see them from that place then. So there's something very metaphysical about the land here that is extra dimensional or extra temporal or whatever. And it's funny, like I had visions of Austin in 1999, and that's exactly what those parts of Austin look like now. Right. Like, and you can ascribe that to remote viewing or gateway experience kind of stuff or different kinds of things. But that level of awareness is a skill. And it's fun in retrospect. Like when you tell the story now, people will be like, well, that's neat. But at the time when you're running around insisting that you feel an energy or you see a thing that everyone else is like, what the fuck is Andy talking about? Or what the fuck is Emily talking about? She's fucking crazy. She did too many drugs or whatever it is, right? It creates that kind of tension that you're sort of talking about. But then later it sort of becomes the obvious thing on a certain level, right? And it goes with music too, right? Like, the music and the music that I was very, very into when I first lived here and that I really wanted there to be a lot of attention on, right? Everyone was like, you're crazy. That's terrible. We don't like that. Now that's like the most popular music here, but like the cheapest possible version of it. And nobody wants anything to do with the original people who were trying to bring that sound to Austin, right? Kind of thing. And so that happens here. I mean, it's very much like Hollywood that way. And I know you've spent time working on it, in ways in Hollywood as well with films and whatnot, but it's very, very much like that in Austin as well. And maybe more so prior in music, because it's only now becoming a huge film city. But mining, right? Like mining the stories somebody overhears you telling in a coffee shop or at a party when you're having a few beers with the guy. And suddenly it's like, oh, okay, that's a movie now. I thought that I was just telling that to somebody, at the coffee shop. Austin is particularly interesting that way. Can you tell us a little bit about the culture of Slack and the Church of the Subgenius? Because this is something that's come up over and over and over in my sort of conspiracy research or my mind control research and whatnot. I first heard of it there was a gentleman named, well, depending on how or when you knew him, named Bob Dobbs or Bob Neverett or Bob Dean, not the Bob Dean that is the UFO Bob Dean, but a different one. And I got introduced to some of his stuff from Randy. And that was where I first heard of the Church of the Subgenius and the Gospel of Slack. And it's come up over many, many times, but you're the only person that I think I maybe know one other person who was there. Can you tell us a little bit about either what it really was or what you think it was or what's going on there?
Before I go into that, I wanted to mention that Linklater also got his idea for Waking Life from me.
I bet. I
was doing astral projection back then. And I told him about how easy it was and how I flew down the main drag of town, astral projecting. And it used it in the film. And it's actually the same house I lived in and the same route and everything that I described to him. Of course, he built a whole movie around that, so I'm not going to claim that. But that's he would quietly just collect stories and put it together. But I wanted to say about Ed Hall, the sound that we came up with, you mentioned that, and that arose from probably an altered state or something from being in that house. I woke up one day and I'm like, we got to do Turkish music. It's got to sound like it comes from Turkey. And I started the tape player and I sat there all day and people coming and going until I'm like, I am going to get this done no matter what. And finally, at the end of the day, this swirling guitar thing came. Gary figured out what I was after, and we were using the tritonal system and And I'm just playing bongos all day, trying to get something going. And Gary finally found this riff, which became like 3 different songs that they play today, even. So that's where that sound came from.
It's interesting.
Really paranormal day and I'm not really a very good musician at all, but I have an ear for things and it's all instinctive based on my experiences singing in choirs and things like that. And I always wanted them to go more, and I wanted to go in a world music type, David Byrne type thing, a direction, and they didn't want to do that. They wanted to play, I guess, Minuteman. What were they called? The Minutemen? Like I don't know, frat grungy sound. I don't know. And so it became Pong. When they became Pong, they started going in that direction that I had originally wanted to go in.
That's interesting that you say that about the Turkish music. I'd be interested to know the parts of town that you sort of hung out at, what you said about your astral projection, right? There is a particular area of town here that I have identified as connected to sort of exactly what you're talking about. Some of these sort of astral projection or temporal distorted movement kinds of things. And it would be interesting to know if you're sort of, if you zero in on the same sort of target area that I do for that, but also as far as the music, like there used to be this club that I hung out in that had a very sort of like Turkish theme. It was like a Turkish hip hop club kind of thing, right? And it was one of my favorite bars in Austin. We used to have dance music events there. Austin, by its nature, does lend itself, in my opinion, to that world music sound that you're kind of talking about. Like I like electronic music, dance music. And there was a particular DJ, like a particular set of sound at a period of time that I really liked, and I felt like went off really well here, but people also kind of rejected it. There's something about this area that sound, that sort of Turkish world sound, and the flutes and the sort of certain swirl. I know what you're talking about. There is that energy here, right? Which is funny because you don't think of that for like Central Texas or Hill Country or whatever, but there is something very worldly about this city on a number of levels, almost like it sits as like a portal or a connection point to all of these other places in space and time, right? And I've felt that many times here. So it doesn't surprise me that you say that. I'd be interested to hear some of that original Turkish sounding music.
I can send you some links. All of the stuff, all of the stuff that I did with Ed Hall prior to leaving is on YouTube. You just look up Andy Colvin and Ed Hall, the two names together.
Okay.
And I don't really like how YouTube organizes it. Sometimes they don't pull the albums together so you can listen to it in a row. I don't know what's going on over there.
Yeah.
But they like to stick in the advertising. Justin Bieber will pop in the middle of your mix. And then also on YouTube, on my channel, I do have a channel. I have an Andy Colvin channel, which is where the Ed Hall stuff is. And you'll see a Mothman type thing there. And then Andrew Colvin just has an A. And that's where all the Ivy League stuff is. Interdimensional Vortex League is what it actually started before Ed Hall. It was like my junior high band, and we kept it going all those years. And we just do really different things. It's really eclectic. But on that Andrew Colvin page, we have all of the Grassy Knoll shows.
Yep, that's the one that Erik found, I think. Yeah.
We did 47 of those, which went into the books.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's on books. Andrew Colvin, not Andy Colvin.
Right. I have two, Andrew and Andy.
You said the shows went into books?
Yeah, the shows that went into the books were all Grassy Knoll. The first 9 books I did are all contained within that time period you were talking about, 2006, 2000. Pardon me. It went on a little bit, like to 2011, 5 years. So those are all in those books. And they're all on YouTube. And then there's all the Mothman photographer videos that also went into the book. So the interviews that I did with the witnesses in that series are in the books as well. So all the material that's in the books is there on YouTube now, but it's a much different experience than when you're trying to read it. When you're trying to read about all these links between things, it drives people crazy and they can't follow it. But they say, hey, I watched the video, and it's like, wow, so much easier to understand. So that's one thing you can do.
Gallon on a YouTube channel.
All right. I've got that one up right now. I'll make sure when we post this show to link this so people can go and check that out. Like, I wasn't able to find one of yours that had this many things on it, so I'm glad you told us about this one.
And to get the Interdimensional Vortex League, you have to type in Interdimensional Vortex League. And then I don't know, I guess there's a page where it shows the albums. So you could, and there's about, I don't know, a couple dozen of those. And they're usually triple albums. So there's a ton of material. I think I put up over 1,000 songs on YouTube at one point. A lot of them, the Ed Hall stuff is much older, recorded on, cassettes in problematic situations. So, so not like a premium listening experience, but I guess you could say it fits in with the grunge,
right?
Theme. Did I answer the last question, whatever that was?
I'll tell you again, and then I will. But first, I want to say, do you think so? Just Interdimensional Vortex League, was that something you created here in Austin, or something you created when you were in West Virginia, or in where was
it? It started in junior high, and we were doing these skits on the radio at night. We had the DJ lived in our neighborhood, and he would let us do these little things, and he would stick on the radio from late at night when no one was listening. And we did a couple of shows, where we were trying to play Frank Zappa and stuff really badly. But, I guess it more or less, yeah, more or less in Austin, I guess, kind of kept the same goofy thing that we were doing before.
You think Austin is an interdimensional vortex?
Well, at the time we were just doing Ivy League, and that was because we had an intravenous drug user in the band. And he thought that was a cool name, and it is a cool name, Ivy League. It's kind of mixed metaphor. But later we found there were other Ivy Leagues out there, and so we decided, well, we'll make sure we have that whole name there, Interdimensional Vortex League. Nobody's going to copy that, so that's the easiest way to. If you just put Ivy League, you might get this other band from South Africa.
All right.
You had mentioned a Vortex, and I believe that was in West Virginia, right?
Yeah.
Did that go into the naming of the band?
Yeah. And there's a whole mythos about it, I guess, within the band, that we're trying to draw ideas from that vortex. And again, it's all about, this is the weird thing about the being in the game and being empty. So the way to score, I developed this technique, and it worked time and time again. You're getting down to the end of the game. It's tied or whatever. You've got the ball, you've got 10 seconds. What do? Or 30 seconds, I guess. I would go down and I would clear my mind. I would just be like, I am not going to even think about this ball, because I know it's going to come to me. Somehow, some way, it's going to come to me. Why? Because I know the guys on my team are going to clench up and they're going to give it to me eventually anyway. Probably. Or it'll just have a strange bounce and it'll come to me. And it happened over and over and over again. But you had to be present without thinking about your performance, but at the same time, nothing, like an empty brain, completely empty. The more empty you could be, the better you could anticipate what was going to happen. It's a strange thing, because you're not interfering with your, I guess, vision of what's going to happen next. You can actually see into the future if you clear your mind.
So it's interesting, like that ability of yours, right, is interesting and special. And sometimes when we come up with these little things, like I have something I do called I make it up and it comes true anyway, right? So rather than going about like trying, what I'll do is when I'm like maybe doing research or maybe just trying to figure something out, and I'm bumping up against not being able to find, like I have a place I'm trying to get and I can't find the connective part, right? I'll free myself from having to prove anything. And I'll say, I'm just going to make up the part that gets me from where I am now to where I want to go and continue with my story. And the more I don't lie and say this is the truth, I let people know that that's what I'm doing. But the more convincingly I tell that story and the more details I add to it, the quicker reality backfills, and I shortly find the information that I couldn't find before that sort of proves the point. And so the question then becomes, did I just have good intuition and I knew eventually I'd find it? Or are we literally authoring our own reality as we go and it'll sort of show up behind us, right? So this ability to sort of employ some of these kinds of techniques, I think, is exactly the reason for what we talked about earlier. Let's just watch Andy and see what he does. Right? He'll figure it out. The thing we can't figure it out because he's able to be more present and not in his way. Right. And then when he's figured it out, we'll get him out of the way and come in and tell the story the way we want to. Right.
That is so seemingly accurate.
So again, the question, you're welcome. So
seemingly.
So the question was, could you tell us a little bit about the culture of Slack and the Church of Subgenius? Because it's kind of hard to get your finger on exactly what that was or wasn't. And there's been all of the usual, Vice interviews trying to disprove it, whatever, all that kind of stuff. It's right. And so since you were there and, you obviously have, like a knack for seeing things, in multi-perspective kind of way. What is it? What was it? what's going on there?
Well, what we were just talking about with the basketball thing is slack. That is the essence of slack. You're not trying. You're not trying.
Okay, got it. Right. Okay.
And before I get into it, I did this last time, but I'll do it again. The last thing you said, the psychic jump is something that where you were talking about jumping and then backfilling.
Yes.
I have to do that all the time because I'll instinctively know what the jump ahead is. And it could be a corporate link or a conspiracy or something or some little piece. And people go, well, you have no proof of that. Well, I know that, but I'll get it later. But because the connection is there, now I'm going to investigate it. It doesn't mean I'm lying or making anything up. It means I simply think that this might be the next thing to look at as part of a process. You get things wrong sometimes and you change it, but because you can't just say, well, it psychically came to me, because then they'll really laugh you out of the building.
Right.
So you have to sit there and how can I explain that I got to this without saying it was just psychic? And that's the tough part.
It's the tough part. Yeah.
But with Slack, boy, there's a lot to say about Slack. I was doing some art at the time, and someone involved with the Dallas group saw it and wanted to put it in their magazine, which was all silent Slack people. And so that's how I got to know the Slack people in Dallas, because there really weren't any in Austin. I was the only one, as far as I knew. There must have been a few more, right? She must have known other people on campus. So, but I didn't know who they were. But I knew the more I corresponded with the Dallas group, and then I found out they were really from Ohio. And I'm like, that's much closer to where I'm from. And they're connected to Devo. And I love Devo. I remember when Devo first hit TV. That's how old I am. And I just thought the Devo idea was great. And the fact that they were behind it or part of it was attractive to me. But I think it was a blank slate that you could play with. It was like a fake religion. Okay, we got us a fake religion. What can we do with that? And I've always been interested in religion from an early age. And I read the Bible when I was like 10. And then I started going to all these churches just to see what they were all like, how they were different. I would have gone to a mosque or a Buddhist temple if there had been one, but there weren't. But eventually I went to those as well. And I've always studied spirituality. And so it's just another part of that, because all religions, basically start this way. They start with somebody making something up or having a paranormal experience, building on that. So, but were you talking about J.R. Bob, the guy who pretends to be J.R. Bob?
Yes.
The guy with the elaborate story about the Butler family he's from, and
yes,
Marshall McLuhan.
Yes.
I know that. I've known him a long time, and I think he's just pulling everybody's leg.
So, yeah.
I
think he's pulling everyone's leg. Most of what he talks about is nonsense, but there's a few nuggets he's dropped in there over the course of time that I can't, my mind can't forget them, and things come up and I'm like, dude, I heard this from that guy and it is undoubtedly true. He made it up or whatever it is. And this thing. And so to me, like what I've extracted, because they've tried to say that, I watched some documentary where they're like, no, it was just a made up thing. There was nothing real to the Church of the Subgenius or the Gospel of Slack. It was just a joke. But I think hidden within that joke was actually the secret of life that we are talking about. That, if you intuitively feel something is true, right? Move towards it, how ridiculous it sounds, and it will become true by sort of that mental energy you intended into it or that you invested into it, right? You can literally make it up as you go along, and sort of, what is that scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark or Indiana Jones where he has to jump over to the ledge but he can't see it, right? He can't see it. He has to jump, and the ledge may or may not have been there, but it appeared under his feet, right? That kind of thing, you know? That's what it seems like it might be to me. I obviously wasn't there. But when I watched this documentary, I'm like, yeah, that's not it. That just seems like whatever they're saying about it seems stupid. And what you're saying seems like something that was sort of fun and kind of joke-like, but you compared it to, you know, spirituality and interesting religions and things like that, and figuring out, you know, make something up, but it's actually true, right?
Well, the people involved in it are really smart, and they've actually moved back to Ohio now. And I went to one of their things about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. They had a big hoodoo in one of the parks that they have, where they have the Star Work. Is this called Star Works? They have big like witch things there, Wiccan, Dungeon Dragons at this park, and they rent it out to whoever. And so I went there for that. They're just creative Austin type people, even though they're not from Austin. Some of them are.
Yeah.
And they hate JR, the fake JR Bob dude. They can't stand him. I mean, right. and I'm one of the few people that straddles both. I've been friends with him a long time because he was on the mind control series in Canada, CKLN. And some of the verbiage he's come up with is fascinating, and I think even if he's pulling people's legs, he's still presenting some nuggets that, as you say, are interesting and valuable.
He introduces the aspect of play, because one of the things that is a problem, I think, in the truth community or the alternative research or the trying to prove or figure out what happened is people get really, really serious. Right. And they forget to play. And so there's no lubricant to move you from one place to the next. Right. And he was kind of always jerking the chain, telling, like, you know, something that you couldn't quite tell if this was like a significant truth or a little white lie. But he did it all with sort of a laughter. And like, it's something that I've used in my research when I can't get to the answer, like I relax and I sort of play and go for like the stupidest, silliest possibility with it. And that usually, if it doesn't land me on the truth, it leads me to the next step, which is into where I need to be. So it introduces that element to it. There's a few things that he said that have stuck with me, but one of them is, you know, try asking the question a different way. Like, we all have these few questions that we like desperately want to know, and we can't understand why we can't get the answer to them. And sometimes it really is just a shifting of like the semantics, or asking it in a less serious, less scholarly kind of way, in a more goofy, playful kind of way. And suddenly pages and pages and pages of research or documents you couldn't find before opens up.
When I was at this gathering, was it X Day, or it must have been something after X Day? Like a react, you know, the time moves backwards in the Subgenius world. Mm-hmm. We're all sitting around the fire, and I'm trying to talk sense into them, because I have a lot of experience with people elbowing in and you know, taking your ideas and trying to mess with you and stuff. And I'm like, you just can't do what you're doing. This is not, to rail against him in this super vicious way is not the angle. You should realize that you've created an open-ended religion where fun and trickery even, you know, are going to be there. And you've got a guy who comes along who's ballsy enough to claim that he's JR. Well, fine. Just let him
be JR.
Let him claim it. And he's obviously smarter than a lot of other people. So why do you want to waste your time arguing? Because he's going to come up with some kind of polemic or something that's just you're not going to defeat this guy,
right,
by arguing with him. The best you can do is ride his coattails. Let him go on and do more shows, and then somehow there's always a way. If money's your, you know, the Subgenius claim that money's their thing. When people steal your ideas, there's usually a way to come back later and tailgate on what they've done, because you rightfully should, because they didn't pay you, right? So you can often use that in your bio or whatever. if somebody steals something from me, they're going to end up in my bio.
I noticed that.
Sooner or later.
I noticed that, right? I mean, it's interesting, and you do it in a very artful way, not in a resentful way. You're doing it kind of like, right? But it's good, you know. I agree with you. I agree. Go ahead, Erik.
The way that I got introduced to the Church of the Subgenius was through the Illuminati playing cards. They had released this Church of the Subgenius deck, and I had no idea what any of this stuff was, but I'm looking through these cards and it just seems absurdist or over the top, and it's supposed to be a LARP or funny, but I felt like there's something deeper to this. It can't just be a huge joke. And what you're saying is, I guess I'm curious, is who signed off on, what's his name? Not Peter Jackson. Anyways, his last name is Jackson. He did those Illuminati cards that have predicted all of these different things. And so it's interesting that he did Church of the Subgenius cards as well. And did the actual Church of the Subgenius have any say or input into that? Or do you?
I don't know. I'm going to look that up. How long ago did the cards come out?
I would say that the late 90s. Because the Illuminati cards have had several different issuances.
Yeah.
Beginning in 94. So Church of the Subgenius was later, probably 98, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I've heard of the Illuminati cards and seen some, but I missed the Subgenius cards for some reason.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of them either until Erik told me about them. There's another iteration of Slack, and then this will be sort of the last thing. I don't know if I want to tell you about it, or I don't know if I'm asking you or telling you something about it, but it was interesting because it makes what you said about being fully present when you're doing what you're doing and not getting distracted. There is a culture. I live right on the lake here, right kind of on a Riverside, just off of Riverside and 35 area, and there's these guys who hang out anytime the weather is above 70 but under 90. You see them out there in the late afternoon or the evening doing what they call slacking. Are you familiar with this? All right, I think so. One of the guy who's most famous, there's a little documentary about him. His name is Tarzan, not Tarzan, but Tarzan, right? And he's a really interesting cat, and it wouldn't surprise me if he had some crossover with the Church of the Subgenius or the Slackers back from the time we're talking about here. He's an interesting guy. I chat with him whenever I see him, and he has all these young kids that he's taught how to slack. And what it is, it's like tightrope walking, but on a loose line. So it's called slacklining, right? And you see all these young kids out there, ripped, strong. They fucking can't stay on the line. This older, he's an older guy, long gray hair, right? Never wears shoes or anything like that. That dude never falls, right? Because he does what you're talking about, right? And I watch these other kids, and some of these other kids are good, and they've taken on, he's really wobbly and loose. If you try to be stiff and tight, you're going to fall, right? But if you just let your body go with the motion, you can stay up there forever. And then part of it is just being able, how many things can you keep in your balance? How many things can you do without falling? So there's a guy out there one day playing the violin while he's doing the slacklining. And then the next day he's wearing a dragon costume playing the violin while he's slacklining. But I pay attention to these guys doing it. And the moment they become aware of what they're doing, they're in the water, right? It's kind of like being focused without that thought that you're talking about. So this guy Tarzan is interesting. I chat with him. There's a documentary about him. I've played it on the show before. He's like, I've read 2 books in my entire life, The Joy of Sex and The Art of Happiness or whatever, but he fully believes exactly how he teaches people to do this, right? In that, it almost matches what you said about being present and then literally just going with the flow and not fighting it at all. And I think it's kind of an interesting iteration on this idea of a culture or a gospel of slack. And there's literally 30, 40, 50 young men out there talking to him like he's God, trying to walk the slack line like he does. It's a fascinating thing to see.
Do you live on Riverside above that little cliff as it goes around?
So a little farther down. I live actually I live closest to Pleasant Valley. It's what it used to be like a junk area of town is now like a high-end lakeside living kind of area. I live really close to Oracle. So I live off of, it's on Lakeshore Boulevard between Lakeshore and Riverside. It's considered East Austin. Like if you were to look right across the water, that's where the East Austin power plant and the baseball fields and everything are. I do the trail here every day. I'm an avid exerciser. Sometimes I walk, sometimes I run. But I have some of the most interesting, strange, unexplainable experiences of my life around this lake or river or however you like to think of it. And I meet some of the strangest people. And what's weird is some of them seem to be paying attention, like focusing their attention on some of the same strange things that I am, right? That feel like they're pretty weird, but other people have noticed them as well, right? And some of it involves even some of your street art and Xerox art being in unusual places. Like I think people use these as identifying spots for like energy, vortex, portal, things like that. Vortex, portal, right? I pay attention to a lot of realities down here on the water. But yes, this is where I met this gentleman, Tarzan, who opened me to the current culture of Slack.
I guess I could sum it up by saying that I've always been truly different. And of course, not trying to identify with it to the point where it becomes I'm special, but just truly different. And when you are truly different, you really spend a lot of time trying to convince people that you're normal, right? You have to. And I've failed time and time again. I can't, but this is how I know who's normal and who's not. The normal people can do it. They can pass themselves off as normal. And a lot of them now are actually on broadcast media posing as people who are weird. There's a lot of this now. The paranormal podcasters, to me, they seem very like normal, like the normals in Subgenius, the Pinks and so forth. We have these names for people. I have new ones like the mustaches. The mustaches are the law enforcement guys, ex-law enforcement, ex-intelligence, ex-military who pervade and rule over the paranormal research community now. And then the Morticias, all the younger tattooed cleavage, dark lipstick, piercings. They're witches, but yet they're accessible podcast people. You get the best, you get the weird and the normal, and we can just have a great old suburban time.
Yeah.
So that's what bugs me about the field right now.
Yeah, well,
fakery.
Thank goodness you could never pull normal off, right? Because we certainly appreciate you as you are. And this has been a really interesting conversation. Like I was thinking this morning, like, how is this going to go? Like there's so many things to talk about with him. And I want to do a different interview than other people have done with you. But I think all of your unique qualities have been able to come through, and hopefully maybe you'll come back sometime and we can zero in on some of like your more favorite or interesting topics, and we can learn from you about how these paranormal or parapolitical events reach out into things that we think of as our everyday life, and so we can apply them to the things that we're looking at that are going on currently. So I want to thank you, for being exactly who you are and for joining us here today. And Erik, did you have anything you wanted to say to Andy before we go?
Just thank you for being here. And I appreciate your wisdom, the things that you've come to understand over the years that you share with people, like what you shared with us today, being in the moment, but the way you describe how you came about doing that, right? It's something that everyone can practice and apply in their own life. I've done it almost instinctually in a different way, but I feel like, there's a lot of value to it. It's when you tell somebody just be in the moment, it's almost like it goes right over their head because it's gone over mine many times before, until you're actually in the moment and you can differentiate being in that moment and being also outside of that, looking at yourself doing the thing, and you understand the difference. And so I thank you for everything that you've done and that you continue to do. This was a pleasure. And I would love to do this again.
Well, we can do that again. We covered a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff we did, at least on my notes. But I feel like the directions we went, was good, and it feels right, and I'm happy with it. And I wish you guys the best until the next time.
All right, just before we go, you do you have a bunch of books out there. Why don't you let people know where they can find your work if they're interested to pursue something further?
Well, it's Amazon. That's it. You put in Andrew Colvin without a B, just Andrew Colvin. And if you put in Andy, for some reason you don't get him. It's bizarre, but
all right.
But Andrew Colvin is the YouTube site, and Andrew Colvin is a search on Amazon for the books. But check out those Grassy Knoll. People should watch this Grassy Knoll. It's a static image, but you can hear what we talked about. You can really see way back then we were catching up with what was going to happen later.
Yeah,
because Biz is very prescient and a smart guy.
Amazing.
And he could see it all coming.
All right. Well, maybe that's something, I've definitely seen some, listened to some of those, but maybe we'll revisit some of that, and we can sort of, talk about some of those things and where we're at now with some of those same threads of information. I will include all the links to your channels and whatnot in the description box below, and we will do it again. You guys, of course, can find Erik on his Esoteric Journey YouTube channel. You know where to find me because you found me here, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you so much.